The first time I understood that my family could erase me without raising their voices was the day my name was quietly removed from a guest list. It was a Tuesday morning in late November, the kind that smells like burnt coffee and cold pavement. I was 32 years old, standing in my kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, scrolling through my phone while my toast went cold. A notification popped up from my younger brother's fiancée, Megan. "Hey, quick question. Are you bringing anyone to the wedding? Final numbers due today." I stared at the message longer than I should have. Wedding? I hadn't received an invitation. I checked my email. Spam, promotions, nothing. I searched my name in our family group chat. The last message mentioning the wedding was from 2 months earlier. My mother had written, "So excited for Daniel and Megan. Such a blessing for our family." No date, no location, no mention of me. I typed back carefully. I didn't realize I was invited. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "Oh, I thought your mom told you," Megan replied. "Let me check with her." That was how it always started. Someone else assumed I already knew. Someone else assumed I'd been told. The responsibility never belonged to the people doing the excluding. It floated in the air, undefined, until it landed on me. I turned off the stove and leaned against the counter. My name is Claire Holloway. I work as a senior compliance analyst for a regional healthcare network. I live alone. I pay my own mortgage. I haven't borrowed money from my parents since I was 21. And yet, in my family, I was still treated like an optional detail. The phone rang 10 minutes later. It was my mother, Evelyn. "Claire," she said, cheerful but tight, like she'd already decided how the conversation would go. "I hear there's some confusion." "I didn't know there was a wedding date," I said. A pause. Not long. Just long enough to be intentional. "Well," she said, "it's going to be very small." Daniel and Megan decided on something intimate. How small? Immediate family. I let the words settle. Immediate family. I was the oldest child. I was Daniel's sister. I was Evelyn's daughter. "So I'm not immediate family?" I asked. "That's not what I meant," she replied quickly. "Of course you're family. But you know how sensitive Daniel is. He doesn't want any tension." There it was. The word that had followed me my entire life. Tension. A vague accusation with no clear crime attached. "What tension?" I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. "Well," she said, lowering her voice, "you've always had strong opinions. And this is Daniel's moment. We didn't want distractions." Distractions. That was new. I thought back to the last Thanksgiving dinner, when my father asked Daniel about his promotion at the family business, and asked me if I was still hopping jobs, even though I'd been at the same company for 6 years. I remembered my mother changing the subject when I mentioned buying my house, then turning to Daniel to ask if he needed help with his down payment. I remembered my birthday being forgotten 3 years in a row, then being told I was too old to care about that stuff anyway. None of that had involved raised voices. No fights, no dramatic confrontations, just a steady, polite pattern of being moved out of the frame. "I see," I said. "Claire," my mother continued, softer now, "you know we love you." This isn't about love. That was when it clicked. Love in my family was not unconditional. It was regulated, measured, distributed based on compliance. "I'm at work," I said. "We can talk later." I hung up before she could respond. At my office, the day moved on like any other. Emails, meetings, a compliance review that required my signature. I noticed how steady my hand was when I signed my name, how calm I felt making decisions that actually mattered. At lunch, I sat with my colleague Janet, a woman in her late 50s who had survived 2 divorces and a corporate downsizing without losing her sense of humor. "You look like someone just took something from you," she said, unwrapping her sandwich. "My brother's getting married," I replied. She waited. "I'm not invited." Janet didn't gasp. She didn't ask why. She nodded slowly. "That kind of exclusion doesn't start with a wedding," she said. "It just ends there." That sentence stayed with me. That night, I drove to my parents' house unannounced. A colonial-style place in Upper Arlington, paid off years ago. My childhood home. The porch light was on. Inside, I could see silhouettes moving in the living room. They were discussing seating arrangements. I stood in the doorway listening until my father noticed me. "Claire," he said, surprised, not pleased. "You should have called." "I wanted to hear it from you," I said. My mother stiffened. Daniel wasn't there. Convenient. It's not personal, my father said, before I'd even asked a question. This is just simpler. Simpler for who? I asked. For everyone, he replied. I looked around the room. The family photos on the wall stopped at Daniel's college graduation. There was no picture of me after age 25. No photo from my master's degree ceremony. No acknowledgement of my life beyond the point where I stopped being useful. You didn't think to ask me, I said. You didn't think to tell me. You just decided. My mother folded her hands. We didn't think you'd understand. I understand perfectly, I said. I'm inconvenient. That's not fair, she said. It's accurate. No one argued. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain myself. That was the moment I realized that the love I'd been chasing was conditional, and the conditions were never written in my favor. As I left the house, my father called after me. Claire, he said, don't make this bigger than it needs to be. I turned around. You already did, I said. You just didn't think I'd notice. I drove home in silence, my phone face down on the passenger seat. Somewhere between the traffic light on Lane Avenue and my driveway, I made a decision. If they could remove me so easily, then I could stop waiting to be included. What I didn't know yet was that the wedding was only the beginning, because 2 weeks later, I would discover that my name had been removed from something far more permanent than a guest list. 2 weeks after the wedding conversation, I received an email that wasn't meant for me. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon, slipped between a calendar invite and a routine compliance alert. The subject line read, Revised Estate Summary, Final Draft. The sender was my father's attorney, Mark Feldman. At first, I assumed it was a mistake in the address autofill. It happens. People with the same last name, old contact lists, forwarded threads. I almost deleted it. Almost. Something about the word final stopped me. I opened the attachment. It was a 12-page PDF titled Holloway Family Trust and Asset Distribution. Formal, dense, written in the kind of language that hides decisions behind legal courtesy. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough. The trust included the house, the lake property in Michigan, the shares of Holloway Industrial Supply, the family business my grandfather built from a garage operation into a regional manufacturer, retirement accounts, life insurance policies, and beneficiaries. Daniel Holloway, primary. Evelyn Holloway, contingent. Future issue of Daniel Holloway, named. My name appeared once. Clause 7B. Claire Holloway is acknowledged as biological issue, but is intentionally excluded from material distribution per settler's directive. Intentionally excluded. No explanation, no justification, just a sentence that removed me from the future. I sat very still in my chair. Around me, the office hummed. Phones rang. Someone laughed down the hall. The world continued uninterrupted, while something fundamental shifted inside me. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't about a wedding. This was a long-term decision. I scrolled to the signature page. The date was from 3 months earlier. The same month my father had asked me, casually, whether I was happy with my career choices. The same week, my mother had suggested I simplify my life and stop pushing so hard. They had already decided I wasn't part of the legacy. I forwarded the email to my personal account, then deleted it from my work inbox. I didn't respond. I didn't call my parents. I didn't confront anyone. I did what I'd learned to do best in that family, I observed. That weekend, I attended Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. I'd almost declined. Almost. But curiosity won. The table was set beautifully. My mother always took pride in presentation. Candles, linen napkins, the good china, reserved for company. Daniel was there with Megan, glowing, newly married. My parents hovered around them like proud hosts. The conversation revolved around the honeymoon, Daniel's role at the company, plans for children. No one asked about my job. No one asked about my house. At one point, my father raised a glass. To family, he said, and to continuity. I watched Daniel smile. I watched my mother dab her eyes. I noticed that my place setting was at the far end of the table, slightly separated, like an afterthought. Continuity, the word echoed. After dinner, I helped clear the dishes. My mother stood beside me at the sink. You've been quiet, she said. I'm listening, I replied. She hesitated. You know your father worries about you. About what? About stability, she said carefully. About whether you're settled. I turned to face her. Is that why you cut me out? Her hands froze in the dishwater. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. I searched her face. There was no shock, no confusion, just calculation. You knew, I said. She looked away. It's complicated, she said. It's clear, I replied. We didn't speak again that night. When I got home, I opened my laptop and searched for attorneys. Estate litigation, trust disputes, inheritance exclusion. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was methodical. On Monday morning, I scheduled a consultation with a woman named Rachel Kim. Her profile listed 15 years of experience in probate law and family asset disputes. Her office was downtown, glass walls, clean lines, no family photos on the desk. That felt right. She reviewed the document silently, flipping pages, making notes. This is deliberate, she said finally. They didn't forget you. They named you to exclude you. Is that legal? I asked. Yes, she said, but it's not untouchable. I waited. If you can demonstrate undue influence, coercion, or retaliation tied to control, she continued, there are grounds to challenge, especially given your grandfather's original will. My heart skipped. My grandfather's will? She looked at me. You didn't know? I shook my head. Your grandfather left a separate letter of intent, she said. It predates the trust. He specifically named you as a future stakeholder in the company. The room felt smaller. I've never seen that, I said. Of course you haven't, she replied. But it exists. I've handled other Holloway matters. Your grandfather was explicit. He believed you were the most independent thinker of the family. Independent. In my family, that had always been code for difficult. What do I do? I asked. Rachel leaned back in her chair. You decide whether you want to be silent or whether you want to be strategic. I thought about the wedding, the guest list, the trust, the years of polite exclusion. I don't want revenge, I said. She nodded. Good, because what you need is leverage. I left her office with a plan and a stack of documents to request. Corporate records, trust amendments, meeting minutes from the family business board. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Dinner went well, don't you think? Daniel was so happy. I hope you understand why some things need to stay simple. I stared at the screen. Then I typed back. I understand perfectly. That's why I won't interfere. I put the phone away and smiled for the first time in weeks. They thought my silence meant compliance. They didn't realize I was done asking for a seat at the table. I was preparing to take my own, and the first move would cost them more than they expected. I didn't confront my parents after meeting Rachel. I didn't hint. I didn't threaten. I didn't even change my tone when we spoke. I went quiet in a different way. The kind of quiet that comes from no longer needing permission. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a student of my own family. Not emotionally, practically. Rachel filed formal requests for documents that by law I was entitled to see. Articles of incorporation for Holloway Industrial Supply, shareholder agreements, board meeting minutes, amendments to the trust. My grandfather's original will and the letter of intent Rachel mentioned. Some came quickly, others resisted. Delays. We'll need time to locate that. Our records go back decades. We'll respond through counsel. That alone told me everything. At work, I asked for vacation days I didn't plan to use. I needed the paper trail clean. No distractions. No emotional outbursts that could be used against me later. I remembered something my grandfather once said to me when I was 17. We were sitting in his garage, the smell of oil and metal thick in the air. People think power is loud, he'd said. It isn't. Power is knowing when to wait. At the time, I hadn't understood. Now I did. The first real crack appeared in the board minutes. Holloway Industrial Supply was still technically a family business, but it hadn't been run like one in years. My father was CEO in title. Daniel had been promoted rapidly after college. Several long-term employees had been quietly pushed out, replaced with consultants and advisors who owed their positions to loyalty, not experience. One name appeared again and again in the margins. Victor Lorne. He was listed as an external strategic advisor. No voting power, no shares, just Influence. Rachel flagged it immediately. Your father doesn't make unilateral decisions anymore, she said. Someone's guiding him. Why? I asked. Control, she replied. And fear. More documents arrived. Emails. Internal memos. One in particular stood out. A message from Victor to my father, dated just weeks before the trust amendment. Daniel is aligned. Claire is not. Long-term risk assessment suggests minimizing variables. I was a variable. Rachel leaned forward when she read it. This helps, she said. How? It establishes motive, she replied. They didn't exclude you because you were irresponsible. They excluded you because you couldn't be controlled. That night, my mother called. Your father says you've been asking questions, she said, voice careful. Legal questions. I'm allowed to, I replied. Claire, she sighed. Why are you doing this? We thought you were finally at peace. I looked out my living room window. The street was quiet. Christmas lights glowed softly on neighboring houses. Mine was dark. I hadn't decorated. I am at peace, I said. That's why I'm doing this. Silence. You're going to hurt your brother, she said. No, I replied. I'm going to stop letting myself be hurt. She didn't respond. Christmas came and went, without an invitation. I spent it alone, intentionally. I cooked for myself, I read, I slept. I didn't check social media. I didn't watch the family photos roll in. On December 27th, Rachel called me into her office. We have enough to proceed, she said. But before we do, there's something you should know. She slid a document across the desk. It was a loan agreement. Holloway Industrial Supply had taken out a substantial line of credit 18 months earlier. The collateral wasn't just company assets. It was the lake property and my grandfather's original shares. Shares that, according to his letter of intent, were meant to be split between Daniel and me. They leveraged assets they didn't fully control, Rachel said. If the company falters, that trust doesn't hold. My pulse stayed steady. What happens if someone challenges it? I asked. Then the entire structure gets reviewed, she said. By a judge. I nodded slowly. For the first time, I saw the full picture. The wedding. The exclusion, the sudden urgency to secure Daniel's position, the rush to amend the trust, the pressure to present unity. They weren't just pushing me out, they were closing ranks. I drove to my parents' house that evening, not to argue, not to demand answers, to observe. The porch light was on again. Inside, laughter. A holiday gathering, delayed. Through the window I saw Daniel, relaxed, confident. Megan beside him, my parents flanking them like sentries. I didn't knock. I stood there long enough to understand something important. They hadn't cut me out because I was weak. They had cut me out because I was the only one who could disrupt the narrative. I returned to my car and called Rachel. File, I said. There was a pause. You're sure? Yes. What do you want as the outcome? She asked. I thought about it carefully. I want recognition, I said. I want the original intent acknowledged. And I want separation. Separation? She repeated. I don't want control of the company, I clarified. I want what was meant for me, and I want out. Rachel exhaled slowly. That's clean. I'm done being managed, I said. We filed the petition the first week of January. My parents were served on a Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone was ringing non-stop. I didn't answer. Daniel left a voicemail. Angry, confused, hurt. Why are you doing this? He demanded. We're family. I deleted it. My mother sent a message. Long, emotional, full of phrases like misunderstanding and unintended consequences. I archived it. My father didn't call. Victor Lorne did. I didn't pick up. Rachel warned me they would try to reframe the story, paint me as unstable, greedy, disloyal. They always do, she said. I know, I replied. That's why I'm not saying anything. The first hearing was scheduled for February. Winter settled in. Cold, gray, still. And for the first time in my life, I felt something unfamiliar but solid. Control. Because the next move wouldn't be emotional. It would be legal. And once it started, there would be no way for them to quietly erase me again. The day before the first hearing, my father finally called. Not my cell. My office line. That alone told me he wanted control over the interaction. I let it go to voicemail. An hour later, my assistant buzzed me. Claire, your father is downstairs. He says it's urgent. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I stood. He was waiting in the lobby, standing too straight, coat still on, hands clasped behind his back, like he was about to address a boardroom instead of his daughter. When he saw me, his expression shifted into something carefully composed. This didn't have to be public, he said, before I'd even reached him. It still isn't, I replied. You just chose to make it legal. His jaw tightened. You're putting the company at risk. You already did, I said. We walked to a small conference room off the lobby. Glass walls. Neutral territory. I didn't offer him coffee. Why now? He asked, sitting across from me. Why are you doing this to us? I folded my hands on the table. I'm not doing this to you. I'm doing it for myself. He shook his head. You've always misunderstood how this family works. I understand it perfectly, I replied. Silence is rewarded. Independence is punished. That's not fair, he said. It's accurate. He leaned forward. Daniel needs this company. You don't. There it was. The hierarchy. Spoken aloud. You're right, I said. I don't need it. But that doesn't mean you get to take what was intended for me. He looked away. For a split second, the mask slipped. You are never going to be happy here, he said quietly. You question everything. I nodded. That's why Grandpa trusted me. His eyes snapped back to mine. He's gone. But his intent isn't, I replied. We sat in silence. Finally, he exhaled. If you go through with this, you'll destroy what we built. You destroyed it when you decided I wasn't worth protecting, I said. He stood abruptly. You're being unreasonable. I smiled, small and calm. That's what people say when they're losing control. He left without another word. The hearing itself was procedural. No drama, no raised voices. Just lawyers, documents, and a judge who listened carefully and asked precise questions. Rachel did most of the talking. I watched. My father's attorney argued that the trust reflected the settlers' wishes. Rachel countered with the letter of intent, the timing of the amendments, the advisory influence of Victor Lorne, and the loan that leveraged assets not fully controlled. The judge frowned, took notes. Proceed to discovery, he said. I want a full accounting. That was the moment the balance shifted. Discovery meant emails, text, financial records, communications that had never been meant to leave the inner circle. Within a week, Rachel called me, her voice tight. They're panicking, she said. Your mother just retained separate counsel. Separate counsel meant fractures. Daniel called again. This time, his voice was different, less angry, more uncertain. Dad says you're trying to take everything, he said. I'm not, I replied. I'm trying to take what was left to me. There was a pause. Why didn't you just talk to us? I did, I said, for years. You just didn't hear me. Silence. They're saying Grandpa changed his mind, Daniel said. He didn't, I replied. They changed it for him. You don't know that, he said. I do, I replied. Because they never told you the whole story. Another pause. I need time, he said. Take it, I replied. This isn't about convincing you. He hung up. Christmas decorations disappeared from my parents' house. I noticed when I drove past one evening. The windows were dark. The place looked smaller somehow. At work, I was promoted. It happened quietly. No announcement. A new title. More responsibility. A larger team. I didn't tell my family. Why give them more information to use against me? Discovery unearthed more than Rachel expected. Emails between my father and Victor discussing managing Claire's expectations. Notes about keeping her distracted with career praise. A draft of the trust that originally included my name, crossed out and revised. My mother's emails were the hardest to read. She knew. She'd known from the beginning. She'd agreed it was necessary. When I confronted her in my mind, she never argued. She just looked tired. The judge ordered mediation. We met in a neutral office downtown. Long table, coffee untouched. A mediator who spoke softly and wrote everything down. My parents sat together. Daniel sat beside them, shoulders tense. Megan wasn't there. Rachel sat beside me. The mediator asked what I wanted. I want my grandfather's intent honored, I said. I want my portion of the shares placed in a separate trust, and I want no involvement in company decisions. My father scoffed. You're tearing the family apart. No, I said. I'm stepping out of a system that was built to control me. Daniel finally spoke. Is that really how you see us? He asked. I looked at him. Really looked. I see how you benefit, I said, and how I was expected to disappear quietly. He swallowed. The mediator turned to my parents. Are you willing to negotiate? My father hesitated. My mother squeezed his hand. Yes, she said. We are. That word changed everything. Negotiations lasted weeks. Numbers shifted. Lawyers argued. Compromises were proposed and rejected. Through it all, I stayed calm. I didn't need to win emotionally. I needed clarity. The final agreement came in early March. My grandfather's shares were transferred into a separate trust, solely in my name. The lake property was removed as collateral. The company refinanced under stricter terms. I signed the papers in Rachel's office. As I handed back the pen, I felt something settle. Not triumph, relief. My parents didn't attend the signing. Daniel sent a message afterward. I didn't realize how much you'd been carrying, he wrote. I'm sorry. I read it once. I didn't reply. Because some apologies come too late to change the shape of things. As I walked out of the building, the air felt lighter. Spring was coming. The world was moving forward. I had my autonomy back. But the real shift hadn't happened yet. Because the next time my family tried to pull me back in, it wouldn't be through money. It would be through guilt. And this time, I was ready. The envelope arrived in late March, thick and cream-colored. My name written in my mother's careful cursive. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the entryway table for 2 days, alongside unopened mail and my keys. I already knew what it would be. Not the details, but the intention. When I finally slid my finger under the seal, I was right. It was an invitation, a formal one, printed, embossed. The kind my mother used when she wanted something to feel important, respectable, impossible to refuse. Evelyn and Richard Holloway request the pleasure of your company at a family celebration dinner. No apology, no acknowledgement of the lawsuit, no mention of the trust. Just a date, a time, their house. At the bottom, in my mother's handwriting, it would mean so much to have you there. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Not, we want to talk. Not, we owe you an explanation. Just the old language of obligation. I showed it to Rachel the next morning. She smiled without humor. That's not an olive branch. That's a leash. I thought so, I said. They've lost control of the assets, she continued. Now they're trying to reassert emotional authority. I folded the invitation and slipped it back into the envelope. Should I go? I asked. Rachel considered. Only if you're clear on your boundaries, and only if you're prepared to enforce them. That night, Daniel called again. Mom's been crying all week, he said. I'm sure she has, I replied. She says the family feels broken. The family was broken before I filed anything, I said. This just made it visible. She wants to make things right, he insisted. Then she can start by acknowledging what she did, I said. Silence. Are you coming to the dinner? He asked. Yes, I said. He exhaled. Thank you. I didn't explain my conditions. The house looked the same when I arrived. Fresh mulch in the beds, new wreath on the door, appearances maintained. Inside, the table was set for 6. My place was across from my father. Deliberate. My mother hugged me too tightly. You look well, she said, like she was checking a box. Thank you, I replied. Daniel avoided my eyes. Megan smiled nervously. Dinner was polite, careful. No one mentioned lawyers or trusts or courtrooms. My father talked about refinancing. Daniel talked about expansion plans. My mother served dessert. Finally, she cleared her throat. We wanted to bring everyone together, she said, because family should come before everything. I set my fork down. Before truth, I asked. The table went still. We made mistakes, she said quickly. But dragging everything into the open like this. I didn't drag anything, I said calmly. I responded. My father's voice hardened. You could have handled it privately. I tried, I replied. You chose silence. Daniel leaned forward. Claire, what do you want from us? I looked at him, then at my parents. I want acknowledgement, I said. Not reconciliation, not dinner. Acknowledgement. My mother's eyes filled. We did what we thought was best. For who? I asked. She didn't answer. I stood. I'm leaving, I said. But I want to be clear. They all looked at me now. I'm not interested in repairing something that required me to disappear to function, I said. I'm not angry. I'm done. My father scoffed. So that's it? You take what you want and walk away? I took what was already mine, I replied. And I walked away from what was harming me. I picked up my coat. Any future contact, I continued, needs to be honest. No guilt, no pressure, no rewriting history. If that's not possible, then there will be no contact. I paused at the door. This isn't punishment, I said. It's a boundary. Outside, the air was cool and clear. I breathed deeply. My phone buzzed as I drove home. A text from my mother. We never meant to lose you. I didn't reply. Because intent doesn't erase impact. And for the first time, I wasn't explaining myself. I was choosing myself. What I didn't know yet was that my refusal to play my old role would push them into one last attempt to regain control. This time, they would use the one thing they thought I couldn't ignore. And they were wrong. The call came 3 days later, just after sunrise. It wasn't from my parents. It wasn't from Daniel. It was from the hospital. Ms. Holloway? A woman said. Professional. Clipped. This is Riverside Memorial. Your mother, Evelyn Holloway, listed you as her emergency contact. I sat up in bed, fully awake now. What happened? I asked. She was admitted early this morning, the nurse replied. Chest pain. We're running tests. She's stable. I closed my eyes for a moment. Of course this was how they would do it. Not with anger, not with demands, with urgency. I'll come, I said, already knowing I would. Boundaries didn't mean cruelty. They never had. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and overbrewed coffee. My mother looked smaller in the bed, hair pulled back, skin pale against the white sheets. My father sat rigidly in the chair beside her, hands folded, eyes fixed on the monitor. When he saw me, relief flickered across his face before he masked it. She's been asking for you, he said. I nodded, walked to the other side of the bed. Hi, Mom, I said softly. Her eyes opened. She smiled weakly. Claire, I knew you'd come. Of course you did, I thought. The doctor explained it was not a heart attack. Severe stress, elevated blood pressure. A warning, not a catastrophe. As soon as he left, my father leaned forward. This puts things into perspective, he said quietly. Life is fragile. I met his gaze. Yes, it is. My mother reached for my hand. I let her hold. I don't want us to be divided, she whispered. Not like this. I don't either, I replied. But unity can't come at the cost of erasing me. Tears slipped down her cheeks. We were afraid. Of what? I asked. She hesitated. That you'd leave us. The irony almost made me laugh. You pushed me away, I said, then punished me for surviving it. My father stood. This isn't the time for accusations. No, I said calmly. This is exactly the time. Silence filled the room. Finally, my mother spoke. We want to fix this. I withdrew my hand gently. Fixing requires honesty. She nodded. What do you want? There it was again. The question that always came too late. I want you to stop using emergencies to bypass boundaries, I said. And I want you to stop expecting access to my life just because you're scared of being alone. My father stiffened. That's unfair. It's accurate, I replied. I stood. I'm glad you're okay, truly. But this doesn't change what I said at dinner. My mother's eyes widened. You're leaving? Yes. You can't just... I can, I said gently. And I am. At the door, I turned back. If you want a relationship with me, I said, it will be on equal ground. No guilt, no emergencies, no rewriting the past. I left before they could respond. In the parking lot, my phone buzzed. Daniel, she's really shaken, he said. Dad, too. I know, I replied. They think you're being cold. I'm being consistent, I said. A pause. I don't know how to be in the middle of this. You don't have to be, I replied. You can choose your own boundaries. That was the last time we spoke for a while. Over the next weeks, my parents tried different approaches. Emails, cards, short messages pretending nothing had happened. Invitations framed as concern. I responded, To none of them. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. At work, things shifted again. The compliance review I'd led quietly uncovered irregularities in one of our vendor contracts. It led to an internal audit. Then, recognition from upper management. I was asked to lead a new oversight division. I accepted. Not because I needed to prove anything. Because it felt aligned. One evening, Janet stopped by my office. "You look lighter," she said. "I am," I replied. She nodded. "Funny how people panic when they realize you're not available for control anymore." I smiled. In April, Rachel called with an update. "Your parents' council reached out," she said. "They want to revisit the agreement." "I'm not interested," I replied. "I know," she said. "But there's something else." She paused. "Your father is stepping down as CEO." I absorbed that. "Voluntarily?" "On paper," she said. "But the board is nervous. The refinancing put pressure on leadership. They want stability." "And Daniel?" I asked. "Still there," she said. "But without your father shielding him, things are different." I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the sun sink behind the houses across the street. For the first time, I noticed how quiet my life had become. No emotional landmines, no waiting for approval, no rehearsing conversations in my head, just space. I realized then that my family had always believed my strength was something they granted me. They were wrong. It was something I reclaimed, and in doing so, I'd removed the last lever they had. What they didn't yet understand was that the story they'd told themselves for decades was about to unravel, not because I pushed it, but because I'd stopped holding it together for them. And when that happens, the truth has a way of surfacing, whether anyone is ready or not. I didn't hear about the board meeting directly. I heard about it the way most truths finally surface, through whispers that no one intended to reach me. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Janet leaned into my office doorway, shut the door behind her, and lowered her voice. "Do you still talk to your brother?" she asked. "No," I said. "Why?" She hesitated. "Because my husband's firm just picked up a consulting request from Holloway Industrial Supply. Emergency restructuring." I didn't react. I waited. "Apparently," she continued, "someone leaked internal communications during discovery. Not just to your attorney, to the board." That was new. "What kind of communications?" I asked. She shrugged. "The kind that make people nervous. Favoritism, manipulation, decisions made to protect one family member at the expense of the company." I thanked her and closed the door after she left. Then I sat, very still. I hadn't leaked anything. Rachel hadn't either. Discovery materials were sealed, but boards had access when fiduciary responsibility was implicated, which meant the board had finally seen what I had seen months earlier. Emails where my father dismissed concerns raised by senior engineers because Daniel needed room to grow. Financial projections altered to make Daniel's division look profitable. Notes from Victor Lorne advising my father to consolidate authority before external scrutiny increases. I was no longer the problem. I was the warning sign they ignored. That evening, Daniel called. I almost didn't answer. "Almost, Claire," he said, his voice strained. "They're questioning everything." I stayed quiet. "They asked about Grandpa's letter," he continued. "The one you mentioned. I didn't know about it, I swear." "I believe you," I said. "They think Dad manipulated the board," he said. "That Victor pushed him." "Yes," I replied. "That's what happened." His breath caught. "They're saying I benefited." "You did," I said, not accusing, just factual. Silence. "I didn't ask for this," he said finally. "No," I replied, "but you didn't question it either." "That's not fair," he snapped. "It's accurate," I said calmly. He exhaled sharply. "They want to bring you in." I felt something shift. "For what?" "Consultation," he said. "They think you're objective." I almost laughed. "They erased me," I said. "Now they want my credibility." "I know," he said, "but if you don't help, they'll assume the worst." I considered it, not emotionally, strategically. "Tell them no," I said. "What?" he asked. "I'm not their shield," I continued. "If they want accountability, they can face it without me." He sounded desperate now. "Dad's reputation is not my responsibility," I said. That was the moment Daniel understood something fundamental. The safety net he'd always assumed would be there, me absorbing the fallout quietly, was gone. 2 days later, the news became public. Holloway Industrial Supply announced a leadership transition pending internal review. My father's name was not mentioned. Neither was Daniel's. Victor Lorne resigned to pursue other opportunities. I watched the press conference online, volume muted. My mother called that night. For once, she didn't try to sound composed. "They're tearing everything apart," she said. "Your father gave his life to that company." "He gave it control," I replied. "There's a difference." "You could help," she pleaded. "They respect you." "I'm not a fixer," I said. "I'm a witness," she sobbed. "I don't recognize our family anymore." "You never recognized me," I replied gently. The line went dead. In the weeks that followed, things unraveled quickly. Longtime employees spoke up. Projects Daniel had been credited for were reassessed. Performance reviews surfaced that had been buried. Daniel was asked to step back from operations, pending evaluation. For the first time in his life, he wasn't protected. He showed up at my house one evening without calling. I opened the door and didn't invite him in. "I don't know who I am without them backing me," he said. I studied his face. He looked younger somehow, less certain. "You get to find out," I said. "That's easy for you," he snapped. "You always wanted out." "No," I said quietly. "I wanted in." Until I realized the cost. He looked down. "I'm sorry." It wasn't an apology. It was an admission. "I know," I said. He left after that. No drama, no closure, just space. Spring turned to early summer. My life continued. Work was demanding, but clean. Decisions made with transparency. Authority earned, not inherited. One afternoon, Rachel called. "The board settled," she said. "Your portion remains untouched. They're restructuring governance entirely." "Good," I said. "There's something else," she added. "Your grandfather's letter is being added to the corporate archive. Officially." I closed my eyes. He hadn't been erased after all. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the porch again. The air was warm, the street quiet. For years, my family had believed they could shape reality by controlling the narrative. They hadn't accounted for what happens when the person holding the truth stops protecting them. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. But I knew one thing. The final reckoning wouldn't come from courts or boards or public statements. It would come privately, when each of them was left alone with the truth they'd avoided for decades. And that reckoning was already underway. The quiet that followed surprised me. I'd expected fallout, accusations, another round of calls demanding explanation or forgiveness, some dramatic attempt to pull me back into the center of the mess. Instead, there was nothing. No messages from my parents, no late-night calls from Daniel, no carefully worded emails from lawyers of family friends trying to check in. Just silence. It took me a few days to understand what it meant. They were no longer united. Without a common enemy, without me absorbing the tension and smoothing the edges, they'd turned inward. And when families like mine do that, the cracks become impossible to ignore. I had fragments through people who didn't realize they were giving me information. My father had moved out of the house temporarily, to get some space, my mother told a neighbor. Daniel had taken a leave of absence from the company, voluntary, according to the press release. Megan had stopped attending family functions altogether. No one asked me to intervene. They'd finally learned I wouldn't. One afternoon in early June, I received a letter from the company. Not legal, not defensive. Administrative. It informed me that the trust holding my shares required a designated representative for annual reporting and voting on limited matters. I could appoint an independent fiduciary or serve in a non-operational advisory capacity. I read it twice. This was the first time Holloway Industrial Supply had addressed me without trying to manage me. I forwarded it to Rachel with a simple note. Independent fiduciary. Please recommend. 10 minutes later, she replied. Already have someone in mind. That night, I cooked dinner and ate it slowly at my kitchen table. I noticed how present I felt. No background anxiety. No bracing for impact. Just myself. A week later, my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me had shifted. Not hope, not fear, neutrality. "Claire," she said, her voice unfamiliar, smaller. "Your father's staying with your aunt for now." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. And I was, in a distant way. "I don't know how this happened," she said, We were always so careful. That word again. Careful. You were careful with appearances, I replied. Not with people. She was quiet for a long time. I thought if we kept things stable, she said slowly, everyone would be okay. At whose expense? I asked. She didn't answer. I'm not calling to argue, she said finally. I don't know how to talk to you anymore. I considered that. Try honesty, I said, without expecting forgiveness. Her breath hitched. I don't know if I can. I believe you, I replied. That was the most truthful exchange we'd ever had. After we hung up, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not reconciliation, recognition. At work, the new oversight division launched officially. I was given authority to build my own team. I hired deliberately, people with reputations for integrity, not ambition. One of them, a man named Thomas, was in his early 60s. Quiet, experienced, unimpressed by titles. You don't run things like someone who needs approval, he said during our first meeting. I used to, I replied. I don't anymore. He nodded. That's when leadership actually starts. In July, I received an email from Daniel. Short, no defensiveness. I'm seeing a therapist, he wrote. I didn't realize how much of my life was borrowed. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know. I read it once. Then I replied, I hope you figure out who you are without protection. It's hard, but it's real. He wrote back 2 words. Thank you. That was enough. The family house went on the market in August. I saw the listing accidentally while browsing online. Fresh paint, staged furniture, no trace of the decades we'd spent there trying to perform normalcy. I felt nothing. That was how I knew I'd moved on. One evening, as summer began to fade, I drove to the lake property in Michigan, not to reclaim it, not to relive anything, just to see it. The water was calm, the dock weathered but solid. I sat at the edge and let my feet hang over. I thought about my grandfather, how he'd taught me to bait a hook, how he'd listened when I talked, how he'd never asked me to be smaller. They'd tried to bury his intent. They hadn't succeeded. I realized then that revenge had never been the point. Revenge keeps you tied to the people who hurt you. What I'd done was something else. I'd removed myself from their system entirely, and without me holding it up, it had collapsed under its own weight. As I drove home, I felt something settle into place. Not triumph, alignment. The next chapter of my life wouldn't be about reacting. It would be about choosing. And that choice was finally, fully mine. The first time I understood how deeply the dynamic had shifted was at a funeral. Not ours. Not even someone close. It was for Margaret Lewis, my grandfather's longtime bookkeeper. She'd worked with him for over 30 years, knew every number, every quiet compromise that kept the company afloat in its early days. She'd retired before the real power struggles began. The service was small, respectful, the kind of gathering where people speak softly and tell the truth, because there's nothing left to protect. I almost didn't go, but something pulled me there. Maybe gratitude, maybe curiosity, maybe a sense that certain chapters only close when you witness them end. I arrived alone. Halfway through the service, I felt eyes on me. My parents sat 3 rows ahead, not together. My mother was on the aisle, my father 2 seats away, leaving an empty space between them, like a physical acknowledgement of everything unsaid. Daniel wasn't there. Neither was Megan. For the first time in my life, I felt no instinct to shrink, to brace, to prepare myself emotionally. I was just another adult in the room. After the service, people lingered in small clusters. Margaret's daughter hugged me. She used to talk about you, she said. Said you were the only one who asked questions that mattered. I smiled. That sounds like her. My parents approached cautiously, as if unsure of the rules. Claire, my mother said. Mom, I replied. No hug, no tension, just acknowledgement. My father cleared his throat. I didn't know you were coming. I didn't know you would be either, I said. Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. She would have liked that, he said. I didn't ask who he meant. We both knew. We stood there for a moment longer than necessary, then drifted apart without ceremony. No confrontation. No reconciliation. Just distance held respectfully. That night, I thought about how different this moment would have felt a year earlier. How charged it would have been. How much of myself I would have lost trying to manage it. Now, it was just information. In September, I received a formal request from the Trust's independent fiduciary. Routine. Annual review. A few signatures. I signed them without hesitation, no emotions attached. That was new. Around the same time, my company announced a merger. Big. Complex. The kind that makes people nervous. I was put in charge of integration oversight. During the first executive meeting, a senior VP leaned across the table and said, "You don't seem rattled." "I'm not," I replied. He smiled. "That's rare." I didn't explain where that steadiness came from. It wasn't confidence. It was detachment from needing to be chosen. In October, Daniel emailed again, longer this time. He wrote about therapy, about how much of his identity had been built around approval, about how lost he felt without it. "I don't know if we'll ever have a relationship," he wrote, "but I wanted to say, I see it now. The favoritism, the way you were positioned as the problem, so I wouldn't have to question anything." I read it slowly. Then I replied, "I'm glad you see it. That's yours to carry now, not mine. I wish you well." I didn't offer more, because distance, I'd learned, wasn't cruelty, it was honesty. That winter, I hosted Thanksgiving for the first time. Not a big gathering, just a few colleagues, Janet and her husband, and Thomas from my team. People who knew me as I was, not as a role. We ate, laughed, shared stories. No tension, no subtext. As I cleared plates, Janet touched my arm. "You look peaceful," she said. "I am," I replied. Later that night, as I washed dishes, I realized something important. No one had asked me to explain myself. No one had expected me to perform. That was the life I'd built. In December, a Christmas card arrived from my parents. Simple, no long message. "Wishing you peace in the new year." I placed it in a drawer, not hidden, not displayed, just acknowledged. That was the balance I'd been working toward. As the year closed, I reflected on what had actually happened. They hadn't lost me because I was difficult. They'd lost me because they needed someone smaller than themselves to maintain the illusion of harmony. When I refused to be that person, the system failed. And that failure wasn't my responsibility to fix. The final realization came quietly. One evening, as I sat alone with a book and a glass of wine. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not apologies, not justice, not recognition. I had already chosen myself. And that choice had changed everything. The last thing my family would ever take from me was my silence. What they didn't know yet was that my silence wasn't absence. It was closure. And closure, once claimed, doesn't reopen. January arrived quietly. Without ceremony, no resolutions, no dramatic declarations, just a continuation of the life I'd already chosen. Work intensified after the merger. Long days, precise decisions, the kind of pressure that reveals who people are when they're no longer protected by titles. I thrived in it, not because I enjoyed power, but because clarity had become my natural state. I noticed something subtle, but important. People no longer asked me for permission to speak honestly. They came to me with facts, not feelings. Problems, not politics. That was new. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a compliance report, my assistant knocked. "Claire," she said, uncertain. "There's a woman here asking to see you. She says it's personal." "What's her name?" "She didn't give one. Just said you'd know her." "I already did." "Send her in," I said. My mother stepped into my office, looking smaller than I remembered. Not fragile, just unanchored. No handbag clutched tightly, no rehearsed smile. She stood there, unsure. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I replied. "You have 10 minutes." She nodded, sat down slowly. "I didn't come to ask for anything," she said quickly. "I just wanted to see you, to understand who you are now." I studied her face. For the first time, I didn't feel the pull to manage her emotions. "This is who I've always been," I said. "You just didn't have room for it." Her eyes filled. "I thought if I kept the family balanced." "You kept it controlled," I said gently. "There's a difference." She looked around my office. The clean lines, the quiet authority, my name on the glass. "You don't need us anymore," she said. I considered that. "I don't need approval," I corrected. "That's not the same thing." She nodded slowly. "Your father doesn't understand that." "I know," I said. Silence settled between us. "Can we start again?" she asked, slowly. I met her gaze. No, I said, but we can be honest from here. Her shoulders sagged, not in defeat, in acceptance. I don't know how to do that, she admitted. That's not my work to do, I replied. She stood, hesitated, then surprised me. I'm proud of you, she said. I believed her, and that, somehow, made it less important. After she left, I closed my door and sat quietly for a few minutes. Not shaken, not relieved, just finished. That was the moment I understood something fundamental. I was no longer available for negotiation. Not of my worth, not of my boundaries, not of my role. Later that month, Daniel sent a final message. I'm stepping away from the company, he wrote. I need to figure out who I am without it. I won't reach out again unless you do. I read it, then archived it. Not because I was angry, because closure doesn't require response. In February, my father resigned from the board. No announcement, no statement, just absence. I felt no triumph, only confirmation. The family narrative that had once required my silence to survive no longer needed my participation to fail. It had failed on its own. One evening, while sorting old documents at home, I found a photo tucked inside a book. My grandfather and me, standing in front of the old factory. I was maybe 16, smiling, unguarded. He had his arm around my shoulders. On the back, in his handwriting, she sees what others avoid. I sat with that for a long time. They had tried to turn that quality into a flaw. Instead, it had saved me. By spring, my life felt steady in a way I hadn't known was possible. Not exciting, not dramatic, solid. I spent weekends hiking, reading, hosting small dinners, saying no without guilt. I realized then that revenge had never interested me. What I wanted was sovereignty, and I had it. The next time my family tried to reach me, it wouldn't be with demands or emergencies or guilt. It would be with something else. An acknowledgement that came too late to change the past, but just in time to test whether I would give up the future I'd built. And that test would be the final one. The email arrived on a Sunday morning, just after I'd finished my coffee. No subject line tricks, no emotional language, just facts. Claire, your father and I would like to meet with you regarding a restructuring matter that directly affects you. This is not about reconciliation. It is about closure. Mom. I read it twice. Not because I was tempted, because I was curious. They'd finally learned the right words. That alone told me how much had changed. I replied with one sentence. You can speak through counsel. Rachel called me within the hour. They reached out, she said. This isn't emotional. It's strategic. About what? I asked. She paused. Your father wants to dissolve the remaining family trust structure. Permanently. I leaned back in my chair. That's final, I said. Yes, she replied. He's proposing a clean legal severance. No future claims, no symbolic ties. For a moment, I said nothing. This wasn't guilt. This wasn't control. This was surrender. What's the condition? I asked. There is one, Rachel said carefully. They want a joint statement, not public, internal. A written acknowledgement that the separation was mutual and respectful. I understood immediately. They wanted to save the last thing they still cared about, their self-image. Do they accept fault? I asked. Yes, Rachel said, in writing. Full acknowledgement of exclusion, manipulation, and misuse of authority. That gave me pause. Not because I needed it, because I didn't. When? I asked. Meeting is requested for Wednesday, she said. Neutral location. Lawyers present. I thought about my life now. The quiet weekends, the work that felt honest, the absence of waiting. I thought about the girl I used to be, standing at the edge of rooms, trying to earn belonging. And I thought about the cost of reopening a door, even briefly. I'll attend, I said, but I won't negotiate my language. Rachel smiled. I could hear it. I figured. The meeting room was spare. White walls, long table, no personal touches. My parents sat across from me, older, tired, stripped of the authority they once wore so comfortably. My father looked at me and nodded once. No attempt at warmth. My mother didn't reach for my hand. That was progress. Rachel and their attorney exchanged documents. Silence filled the room as pages were turned. Finally, my father spoke. We made decisions to maintain control, he said. His voice was flat. We justified them as protection. They were neither. I watched him carefully. This wasn't remorse. It was reckoning. You were excluded deliberately, my mother added. We told ourselves it was temporary. It wasn't. I didn't respond. They continued. We understand that no statement can undo that, my father said. This isn't an apology. It's an acknowledgement. I nodded once. The attorney slid the document toward me. It was exactly as Rachel described. Clear, direct, no euphemisms. They admitted favoritism, control, retaliation, emotional leverage, legal exclusion. They acknowledged harm. And then came the final paragraph. Upon execution of this agreement, all parties agree to full legal and personal separation, with no expectation of future contact, obligation, or involvement. I read that paragraph twice, not because it hurt, because it didn't. I signed. My parents signed. The attorneys witnessed. No one cried. No one reached across the table. When it was done, my father stood. This is the last thing we will ask of you, he said. The statement. Rachel looked at me. I nodded. I took the pen and wrote my portion by hand. I acknowledged the separation as necessary and permanent. I release all expectations of repair, explanation, or future access. I choose my life as it is, without revision. I handed the page back. That was it. As we stood to leave, my mother hesitated. I hope you're happy, she said. I met her eyes. I am whole, I replied. There's a difference. We walked out separate doors. That evening, I went home and cooked dinner. Simple, quiet, ordinary. No heaviness, no aftershocks, just space. I realized then that closure doesn't always arrive with comfort. Sometimes it arrives with clarity so complete, there's nothing left to feel. One chapter remained. Not with them, with me. Because the end of a family story is never the end of a life. It's the beginning of living without permission. And that was what Chapter 12 would finally be about. The morning after the meeting, I woke up without the familiar weight in my chest. No lingering conversation replaying itself. No imagined alternative endings. No quiet hope that someone would suddenly understand what they never had. Just morning light through the window and the steady sound of my own breathing. That was how I knew it was over. Not the legal part. That had ended with signatures and witnesses. The emotional part. The waiting. The subconscious bargaining. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen counter, barefoot, watching steam rise from the mug. For years, mornings had carried a faint tension, as if something unresolved might arrive at any moment. A call, a message, a crisis that would demand I step back into a role I'd already outgrown. That tension was gone. I didn't feel victorious. I felt unburdened. Later that day, I went into the office and did what I always did. Reviewed reports, made decisions, signed my name where it mattered. No one there knew what had ended the night before, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Power doesn't announce itself. It settles. At lunch, Thomas stopped by my office. You look different, he said. How so? I asked. Like someone who finally stopped carrying a second life in their head. I smiled. That's accurate. He nodded, satisfied, and left it at that. No follow-up questions. No curiosity disguised as concern. Respect. That evening, I drove without thinking to the outskirts of the city, when new developments ended and open land began. I pulled over, stepped out of the car, and stood there as the sun lowered itself into the horizon. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who learned early that love could be withdrawn, that approval had a price, that silence was safer than honesty. I didn't pity her. I honored her. She survived long enough for me to exist. People like to imagine revenge as a moment, a confrontation, a dramatic reveal. Someone breaking down, finally seeing the truth. That's not how it happens most of the time. Real revenge is quiet. It looks like independence. It looks like boundaries enforced without apology. It looks like a life that no longer needs witnesses from the past to feel real. My family believed they were teaching me how the world worked. What they actually taught me was this. Anyone who needs you smaller in order to feel secure is not offering love. They're offering control. I chose not to negotiate with that anymore. Weeks passed, then months. No contact, no updates. No messages slipping through mutual acquaintances. The agreement held because it had to. There was nothing left to extract from me. In its place, my life expanded. I took a short trip alone in early summer. Nothing extravagant. Just a quiet town, long walks, time to think without interruption. I read books I'd been putting off. I slept deeply. I let my days be unremarkable in the best possible way. One afternoon, sitting in a small cafe, I realized something that would have shocked my younger self. I didn't miss them. Not because I was cold, not because I'd hardened, because the version of family I'd been mourning never actually existed. What I missed was the idea. And I'd finally let it go. On my way home, I stopped by a bookstore and bought a journal. Not to process grief, not to document trauma, to plan. Because when you stop living in reaction to others, the future opens up in practical, grounded ways. What kind of work do I want to build? What kind of people do I let close? What does peace look like when it isn't borrowed? The answers came easily. That was the final proof. I no longer measured my life against people who never saw me clearly. I measured it against my own standards. If there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's simple and sharp. You don't owe access to people who confuse love with ownership. You don't owe loyalty to systems that survive by sacrificing you. And you don't need permission to walk away with your dignity intact. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight. It's to sign your name, close the door, and build a life so solid that the past has nowhere left to stand. That's what I did. And if you're listening to this story and you recognize yourself in it, know this: choosing yourself is not abandonment. It's survival with intention. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like it, share it, or leave a comment. Your engagement helps these stories reach the people who need them most. And if you want more stories about boundaries, justice, and quiet revenge, subscribe. Sometimes the most powerful payback isn't what you take. It's what you refuse to give ever again.